The night of June 11, 1962, was cold and moonless over the island of Alcatraz. The tide was rising, the wind was brutal, and the black water of San Francisco Bay churned like a living thing. Somewhere beneath that darkness, three shadows moved silently, three men who had done the impossible. They had broken out of the most secure prison in America. The guards didn't know it yet. As they patrolled the tier, everything looked normal. Every prisoner was in his cell. Every bed was occupied. But that was the illusion. Because the men sleeping under those blankets weren't men at all, they were dummy heads, crafted from soap, toilet paper, and real human hair stolen from the barber shop. The real inmates were gone. They had vanished into the night. At dawn, the alarm finally sounded. Guards rushed from cell to cell, their flashlights catching the terrifying truth. The back walls of cell 138, 140, and 144 were gone. Holes had been chiseled through the concrete, hidden for months behind cardboard and paint. Through those holes ran a narrow, dark utility corridor leading up into the prison's ceiling and, beyond that, to the roof. The greatest escape in American prison history had just happened. Their names were Frank Morris and Clarence and John Anglin, two brothers. All three were serving long sentences for bank robbery. None were violent killers, but they were brilliant, patient, and determined. And now, they were ghosts. The FBI swarmed the island, helicopters circled the bay, and searchlights tore through the darkness. But there was no sign of them, no raft, no bodies, no clue. Just the freezing, deadly waters stretching toward San Francisco. Had they drowned? Or had they escaped and vanished into the world forever? That was the question that would haunt America for the next 60 years. Alcatraz was supposed to be the end of the line. Built on a rocky island in the middle of San Francisco Bay, it was designed for the most dangerous, most cunning, and most escape-prone criminals in the federal system. It had everything: gun towers, searchlights, guards with orders to shoot, and the frigid bay waters that acted as a natural moat. The government said it was escape-proof. No one had ever successfully gotten out alive. Until that night. Frank Morris was the mastermind. Born in Washington, D.C., he had spent most of his life in and out of prisons. But he wasn't just a thief, he was a genius. Psychologists who evaluated him said his IQ was in the top 2% of the population. Morris was quiet, calculating, and obsessed with finding a way out. The Anglin brothers, Clarence and John, were from a poor farming family in Georgia. They had grown up working tough jobs, learning how to swim in icy waters, and building things with their hands. Like Morris, they were serving time for bank robbery. And like Morris, they hated the idea of dying behind bars. The three met inside Alcatraz in the late 1950s and quickly bonded over one shared obsession: escape. Their plan took more than 6 months to pull together. It started with spoons, stolen from the mess hall, and turned into one of the most ingenious prison breaks in history. Every night, after the lights went out, the three men worked quietly at the back of their cells. They used the spoons to chip away at the concrete around the air vents, a few grains at a time. They disguised the noise by playing music on the prison accordions during recreation hours, a trick that fooled the guards. The holes were small at first, just big enough to fit a hand through. Then a shoulder. Then an entire body. They needed a place to hide the debris. They stuffed it into cracks in the walls, flushed it down toilets, even hid it inside the legs of their pants and scattered it in the yard during exercise time. No one noticed. Behind the holes was a dark utility corridor, a hidden passage running behind their cells. Once inside, they could climb up to the roof through pipes and vents. But they weren't ready to leave yet. They needed a way off the island. That's where the real genius came in. They built a raft, from raincoats. Over 50 raincoats, stolen or scrounged from the laundry, were stitched and glued together using prison workshop materials and heat from steam pipes. They crafted paddles from scrap wood. They even made life vests. All of it was hidden in the utility corridor, above the cells, out of sight from the guards. To make sure no one noticed their absence during head counts, they sculpted dummy heads from a mix of soap, toilet paper, and real human hair collected from the prison barbershop. The heads were so realistic that even guards walking past the cells didn't notice the difference. By early June 1962, the plan was ready. They just needed the right night, one with low tides and no moonlight. June 11th was that night. After lights out, the three men went to work. One by one, they slipped through the holes behind their cells and crawled into the narrow corridor. The climb to the roof was risky, one wrong noise, and they'd be caught. But they made it, hauling the makeshift raft and paddles with them. Once on the roof, they crossed the prison yard and reached the island's shoreline. There, in the cold darkness, They inflated their raincoat raft with a stolen concertina and prepared to push off into the frigid waters of San Francisco Bay. It was around 10:30 p.m. when they launched. Witnesses later reported hearing a strange splash that night. No one knew it then, but the most famous escape attempt in U.S. history was underway. When morning came, chaos erupted. Guards discovered the dummy heads during roll call and sounded the alarm. Searchlights swept the water. Boats combed the bay. The Coast Guard was alerted. But there was nothing. No raft. No bodies. No trace. All that was found was a paddle floating near Angel Island and a plastic-wrapped wallet containing photos and names belonging to the Anglin brothers. The official conclusion from the FBI was grim: they drowned. The water was too cold, the currents too strong, and the distance too great. But not everyone believed it. Some investigators, and even members of law enforcement, weren't convinced. The fact that no bodies were ever found bothered them. And then, over the years, rumors began to surface. A letter allegedly written by John Anglin arrived at a San Francisco police station decades later. In it, the writer claimed that all three men had survived and were living in hiding. "We all made it that night," the letter read. "We're old now. We want to come home." Was it real? Or a hoax? The FBI couldn't confirm it. But the handwriting was close. The details were convincing. And that letter reignited one of America's most enduring mysteries. Did Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers survive the impossible? Or did they vanish beneath the waves that night? Years later, new clues would emerge: grainy photographs from Brazil, alleged sightings in Florida, family members who claimed secret visits. Each new lead seemed to pull the story in a different direction. And yet, despite decades of searching, one fact remained: no trace of the three men has ever been found. No bones. No bodies. Nothing. And that's why, even today, the question still lingers. If they survived, where did they go? And if they didn't, why did the Bay keep it secret? The morning after the escape, June 12, 1962, Alcatraz Island was swarming with chaos. Sirens wailed. Patrol boats circled the island. Helicopters buzzed overhead. FBI agents, U.S. Marshals, and Coast Guard units poured into San Francisco Bay. What had once been considered impossible, an escape from the escape-proof prison, had just happened, and the U.S. government was in full panic mode. The FBI wasted no time launching one of the largest manhunts in American history. Within hours, hundreds of officers were searching the cold waters around Alcatraz, combing beaches, docks, and rocky shorelines from San Francisco to Sausalito. Divers plunged into the dark depths of the bay, searching for bodies. Coast Guard cutters swept the waves. Police checkpoints sprang up across the region. But there was nothing. No raft. No bodies. No sign of Frank Morris or the Anglin brothers. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. The FBI's initial conclusion was swift: they drowned. The waters surrounding Alcatraz are among the coldest and most treacherous in North America. Even in June, the temperature hovers around 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 to 13 degrees Celsius, cold enough to kill within an hour. The tides are vicious and unpredictable, capable of sweeping even strong swimmers out into the Pacific Ocean. And the distance from the island to the nearest shore is more than 1.5 miles. Federal officials were confident no one could survive that swim, especially at night and with homemade equipment. Their public statement was simple: the men are presumed drowned. But behind closed doors, they weren't so sure. The first sign that the story wasn't over came just a day later. A Coast Guard boat found a makeshift paddle floating in the bay, about 200 yards from Angel Island, a small, uninhabited island north of Alcatraz. Hours later, they discovered a plastic-wrapped wallet floating nearby. Inside were photographs, family names, and contact numbers belonging to the Anglin brothers. The FBI took it as proof they had drowned. But others saw it differently. Why would a wallet be carefully sealed in plastic, a deliberate waterproofing, if they didn't plan to use it after escape? It suggested intention. It suggested planning. And most of all, it suggested they expected to survive. The FBI expanded the search inland. They raided addresses connected to the Anglin family in Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. They questioned Frank Morris's known associates in Louisiana and Kansas. They placed alerts at border crossings and airports. Every train station, bus depot, and seaport was on watch. Still, nothing. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. The official investigation slowed, but it never truly stopped. And then, the sightings began. In 1965, a man reported seeing two men in a bar in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, who looked exactly like the Anglin brothers. He swore they spoke English with American accents and left quickly when they noticed he was staring. The FBI followed up, but by the time agents arrived, there was no trace of them. In 1967, another tip surfaced, this time from a woman in Georgia, who claimed two strangers matching the Anglins' descriptions had attended her relative's funeral. They kept their distance and didn't speak to anyone. When police checked the area, they were gone. Then, in the 1970s, an even stranger story emerged. A man living in South America claimed he had met Frank Morris at a bar in Paraguay. The man said Morris introduced himself under a different name but slipped up when talking about that prison island. Again, the FBI investigated. Again, there was nothing concrete. Every time a lead appeared, it vanished just as quickly, like ghosts. Meanwhile, investigators were re-examining the science. Could they have survived the swim? The FBI asked experts at the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard to recreate the conditions of that night, the water temperature, the tides, the winds. The results were surprising. Survival was possible if they launched at the right time and aimed for the right part of the shore. And the men had been careful. They had chosen a moonless night when the tides were at their weakest. They had built a raft from waterproof raincoats. They had trained their bodies for months, running in place in their cells and even practicing breath control. The more investigators looked, the more they realized something chilling: this plan could have worked. The investigation took a new turn in 1979, when the FBI officially closed the case. After 17 years of searching, the Bureau declared the men dead, citing the lack of credible evidence of survival. But the U.S. Marshals Service refused to give up. They took over the case, and kept it open. To this day, it remains active. And then, in 2013, a bombshell dropped. The San Francisco Police Department received a handwritten letter. It was shaky and uneven, signed by John Anglin. The writer claimed that all three men had survived the 1962 escape. Frank Morris, he wrote, had died in 2008. Clarence Anglin, he said, had died in 2011. And he, John, was old and sick, living under a false name. If you announce on TV that I will be promised to first go to jail for no more than a year and get medical help, the letter read, I will write back to let you know exactly where I am. This is no joke. The letter was sent to the FBI for testing. They examined the handwriting, the paper, the DNA. The results were inconclusive. They couldn't prove it was real, but they couldn't prove it was fake either. And that changed everything. More evidence followed. In 2015, a team of Dutch scientists used advanced tide simulation models to reconstruct the escape. Their conclusion? If the men launched between 11 p.m. and midnight, the currents would have carried them safely to Angel Island, the same area where the paddle and wallet were found. If they launched earlier or later, they likely drowned. The timeline matched perfectly with what investigators knew. Then came the most sensational revelation yet. In 2015, a photograph surfaced, allegedly taken in Brazil in 1975. It showed two men in sunglasses standing on a farm. Facial recognition experts compared them to known photos of Clarence and John Anglin. The match, over 90% certainty. The FBI dismissed it as unverified. But the Marshals? They weren't so sure. Even family members of the Anglins added fuel to the mystery. The brothers' nephews claimed that two men resembling Clarence and John had visited their mother in the 1970s, under the cover of night. They didn't stay long. They didn't speak much. But they hugged her before they left. She never spoke about it again. Was it a story born from family legend? Or a buried truth too dangerous to say out loud? For every piece of evidence pointing to their deaths, another pointed to their survival. For every reason to believe they drowned, there was a reason to believe they didn't. And that is why, decades later, the U.S. Marshals continue to chase the case. Even now, they keep age-progressed photos of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers on their desks. Even now, they follow up on new tips, no matter how small. Because until a body is found, until a confession is confirmed, until someone, somewhere, reveals the truth, the case remains open. And the mystery of Alcatraz remains unsolved. But what if the answer has been hiding in plain sight all along? What if the clues the FBI missed weren't just in the water, but in the prison itself? Because deep in the archives of the Alcatraz files, buried beneath decades of dust, lies a piece of evidence that could change everything we thought we knew about that night, and reveal once and for all whether the three men truly escaped, or met their end beneath the waves.